afternoon, everybody. My name is Jo Farr-Hernandez, and I'm director of the Natalie and James Thompson Art Gallery at San Jose State University. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this panel discussion of the art of time on the topic of Bruce Nauman's San Jose installation from 1970. This project has literally been years in the making. And when I started thinking about it, I was thinking about the little blips of connection that I'd had with Nauman over the years. Back in 2006, when I was working on an exhibition of work by Gerald Waldberg, another sculptor, I realized that he and Bruce had been colleagues at UC Davis, grad students together, and we talked about some of their shenanigans as we prepared for his retrospective, and some of that is included in the book that we did in conjunction with that exhibition. 3 years later, my husband and I were down in New Mexico for the opening of an exhibition of his work, and we were invited out to Bruce and Susan's ranch. We brought roasted chiles that we found in the marketplaces that were perfuming all of the streets at that time. It was harvest season. And Bruce and Susan filled in the potluck as we sat on the long table in their living room, walked the ranch lands, keeping our distance from the jumping cholla cactus, and explored the current work in both of their studios. That was almost 10 years ago. And then back in the fall of 2015, when I was actually in Madrid running the CSU program there, I received a note from Dory Bowen indicating that she, along with grad student Keith Daly and our illustrious emeritus professor Tony May, were exploring the possibility of recreating the double wedge corridor with mirror installation that had graced the department's art gallery back in 1970. We'd had numerous requests for information about this project over the years from PhD students, PhD candidates, or researchers, but with the university's vintage archival materials in boxes and no staff available to really engage in substantive research, we really were unable to respond to those requests. But Dory and Keith and Tony, and later Connie and Ted and Gwen and Joan and Juliet grabbed onto this idea with passion and enthusiasm, digging deep into the archives, tracking down photographs and notes, and ultimately recreating with as much precision and authenticity as humanly possible a new iteration of the 1970 San Jose installation, which is currently on view through February 23rd in what is now known as the Natalie and James Thompson Art Gallery at San Jose State. In order to maintain that authenticity, while simultaneously providing accessibility for all visitors to as great an extent as possible, we enlisted our digital media professors Andrew Blanton and Rhonda Hulberton, who developed a plan with their students to create a virtual reality component of the project, which is on view right now as well at the same time across from the Thompson. This permits both those who are physically unable to access the corridor to enjoy it, as it likewise enables an analogous experience for those who are uncomfortable in that tight a space. In this way, this project has truly become a time tunnel, bridging the years and also the environment and culture of Santa Clara Valley, now Silicon Valley, with an artwork that is compelling and enigmatic despite its ephemerality. As I commented to those who helped develop and install the various components of this project, it reminded me of the 1970s, when anything could happen, and often did. The creativity that funded those projects, that fueled those projects, propelled them to become iconic moments in the history of art. When I witness all of the illustrious participants who are here today, as well as to our new generation of curious students, I think this reinstallation will be another one of those moments. Each of the participants in our panel has had a unique relationship to the artist or to this particular work, so each brings a personal perspective that will, in total, help to provide a comprehensive understanding of and appreciation for this project. So I'd like to introduce Dory Bowen, the guiding light of this project, and she will then introduce her fellow panelists. Dory is an associate professor of art history here at San Jose State University. She is currently in the throes of the final preparation, along with Connie Llewellyn, of the book Bruce Nauman, Spatial Encounters, which will be forthcoming at the end of this year from the University of California Press. Other works of hers have been published in a variety of collections, including the Companion to Art History since 1945, published by Blackwell Press. Otherwise, Imagining Queer Feminist Art Histories from Manchester University Press, and Histories of Arab Documentary, American University of Cairo Press, forthcoming. Thank you all again for attending, and please join me in welcoming Dory Bowen.
Thank you, Joe. I did not curate this alone, and I would like to acknowledge the many people that contributed, participated, encouraged this project. Number one, the Dean of Humanities and the Arts at San Jose State University, Shannon Miller, for an Artistic and Excellence grant, which made this panel possible. Associate Dean Kathleen McSherry, Art and Art History Department Chair Anthony Rainsford. Thank you for supporting this. From the Natalie and James Thompson Gallery, Joe Farb Hernandez, who just spoke, Aaron Wilder, who helped to organize this event and jumped in to make this project possible in Joe's absence last semester. Cynthia Chow from the gallery, Tara Amico, who was involved in actually constructing it, Joe Ranieri, Huve, and Gabe Pacheco, namely, photographers Mike Batty, Nin Phillip, Tran, the Hammer staff, Hannah Hudgens, Anthony Sutton, Maria Bones, and Lisa Lehman, Keith Sanders, who is here from Media Technology and recording it. Of course, we want to thank Bruce Nauman for creating this amazing work of art. And although he can't be here today, we're thrilled to have Juliet Myers, his studio manager, with us. We also have curator Joan Simon, the general editor of the Catalogue Raisonné, the Bible for Bruce Naumanites, Dr. Gwen Allen, who writes on small press, artists press, and all of whom will be introduced after my introduction. Although the institutions that preserve and display art are generally located in urban centers, art happens everywhere. It happens here more than we realize. This panel is organized around the exhibition Time Tunnel, Bruce Nauman's Corridor Installation with Mirror, San Jose installation, in the Thompson Gallery until February 23rd. The curatorial team includes me, Keith Daly, Tony May, and Connie Llewellyn, who came on later, and as Joe mentioned, Rhonda Halberton and Andrew Blanton. These curators and participants spoke at a panel organized for the opening of the exhibition and are here today, and I hope they'll participate in the question and answer. The exhibition consists of the reinstallation of an artwork first installed by Nauman at San Jose State then college, the first week of May 1970. In the book I'm co-authoring with Connie Llewellyn and an essay by Ted Mann on Nauman's architectural installations, I use this reinstallation as an opportunity to examine the art historical framework by which this and related experiential artworks are understood today. Shifting the framework from the conventional artist artwork structure, we can think of this differently. We can think of it as relating to its infrastructure. And indeed, this installation is inserted seamlessly into the gallery, made of the same materials as the building in which it is placed, while the mirror at the apex of the double corridor offers unexpected reflections. In my research, I also studied the personal infrastructure, the network of relationships that made the installation possible. Nauman's relationship to Tony May, but also Steve French, who taught at San Jose State and was Nauman's and May's professor at the University of Wisconsin. I also came across previously unstudied artifacts and documents, such as a Super 8 film by Nauman sent to French in the collection of Wanda French, Tony's film of the Naumans from a later time, and the video interview with Nauman by Willoughby Sharp, which was done on the occasion of the installation in 1970 and was later transcribed in Avalanche Magazine. For her part of the book, Connie brilliantly examines Nauman's numerous experiments with corridors while placing this within his larger of particularly she looks at his tunnels, his shafts, his rooms, as well as his corridors. And Ted Mann on this panel today contributes an important essay on the role of drawings, maquettes, and mock-ups in Nauman's process. We can also consider Nauman's installation in the historical context and now the current installation, as well as the VR component in terms of its new context. In 1970, San Jose State campus was rocked by memorials and demonstrations. The May 1970 installation took place the same week as the Kent State shootings. Photographs from the period depict a campus in revolution. Today, San Jose has been incorporated into Silicon Valley, and the campus is peaceful, bustling, and urban. As Nauman's early proposals suggest, he imagines the corridor as a spatial but also a temporal passage, like a time tunnel, though not a straightforward one. In his 1969 proposal, he describes a figure up ahead in the future, hovering just to the side. Thinking of this installation as itself a time tunnel prompts us to ask, how are we experiencing it today versus how it was experienced in 1970? If experiential work such as Nauman's corridor installation with mirror, San Jose installation, double wedge corridor with mirror, to use the entire title, incorporate the participant into the work, how might we say that the work has changed today when the nature of experience has been affected by the development of communication technologies? The current exhibition includes the VR version, and over the past week, I've had the opportunity to talk about the piece with students and faculty, and those who experienced the VR, those who grew up with it, those who did not. To help us sort through the many questions raised by this installation, we're convening this panel today, and we're thrilled to have assembled some of the experts in this field to talk to us and with us about Bruce Nauman's corridor, about the art world context in which this exhibition took place, about its relationship to his career and his work today and his retrospective, as well as the process that comes up when talking about this kind of work. We have 4 speakers: curator Joan Simon, Dr. Gwen Allen, Ted Mann, assistant curator at the Guggenheim's Panza Collection, and Juliet Myers, Bruce Nauman's studio manager. I'll now introduce our first speaker. Joan Simon is a writer, curator, editor, arts administrator. Since 1986, she has worked independently for museums, foundations, and publishers in the United States and Europe. She has curated such recent exhibitions as Lorna Simpson for the Jeux de Paume in Paris, in partnership with the Foundation for the Exhibition of Photography, Minneapolis, the show traveled to the Haus der Kunst in Munich, Baltic Center for Contemporary Art, Gateshead, England, and the Addison Gallery of American Arts. Sheila Hicks, 50 years with Susan Faxon for the Addison Gallery. The show traveled to the Institute of Contemporary Art, Philadelphia, the Mint Museum of Craft and Design, Charlotte, North Carolina. Simon served as curator at large at the Whitney Museum of American Art from 2004 to 2009. There she organized the Alice Guy Blaché Cinema Pioneer and Alexander Calder The Paris Years, 1926 to 33, and was a contributor to the exhibition catalogs for Gordon Matta Clark, You Are the Measure, and Jenny Holzer, Protect, Protect. A managing editor of Art in America from 1974 to 83, and later a contributing editor to the magazine, Simon has written for numerous museum publications as well as the Cahiers d'Art, Parquet, and Art Press. Her interviews with artists have been republished numerous times in collected volumes and in translation. She served as general editor of the Bruce Nauman Catalogue Raisonné in 1994 and has co-authored or edited publications including Oliver Ranch, 2015, In the Shadow a Shadow, the work of Joan Jonas, 2015, The Distaff Side, 2014, William Wegman, Funny Strange, 2006, Susan Rothenberg, 1991, and 2 books on Anne Hamilton, 2002, and Anne Hamilton, An Inventory of Objects, 2007. Very happy to introduce Joan Simon.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, can you see? Okay. So, in 1989, I was living in Tribeca and saw this through a window at a nearby gallery. It's by Jessica Diamond. I had known Nauman for 10 years, admired his work for 20. I'd worked with him on several occasions on a 4-artist show that didn't happen, but then on a related film that did, and for a Whitechapel exhibition catalog. I was soon to begin work on the Nauman Catalog Raisonné, and it's something we joked that was a 10-year project that was condensed into 5 years. I've since interviewed him many times, contributed to a number of exhibition catalogs, and have followed and worked with many other scholars who have taken Nauman studies to many new places. The occasion of the reinstallation of Bruce Nauman's 1970 San Jose corridor prompted thoughts about its relationship to other of his works, past and present, and especially about its process, the underlying question always of how to proceed. That always marks his diverse body of work and, relatedly, the wide-ranging influence he's had on many generations of artists. My comments today and the accompanying images and video clips focus on how Nauman proceeds, what, at different moments in time, may prompt an initial concept, when or how he may return to ideas, and why such reoccurrences are not duplicative revisits but renewals, redirecting himself and us to once again pay attention, to borrow a phrase he's used many times. The process of return is seen, as you'll see, in Nauman's corridors that we're celebrating here because of the San Jose corridor, in the clowns, in the stairs, in the hands, in the many iterations of the true artist, his repeats of the word repeat, or the word no. I won't play the whole of it. This one is called No No New Museum from 1987. It was installed inside a window, street-side existing window, and the sound was deployed outside the museum with speakers to the street. Nauman is known as a man of very few words, terse. He's also known for not being shy of the word no, saying no to many invitations and so forth. And he's returned to the concept of the words no in a number of works. In a neon, in a drawing. This is Nauman at Gemini Gel in California, where the two no lithographs were published as part of 8 lithographs to benefit the Foundation for Contemporary Performance Art. And there it is, live. And this is something else. Throughout his career, he has found inspirations in all kinds of things. Other artists, other art, information he's found in magazines, whether it's a scientific journal where he found learned helplessness in rats, or something he's overheard. The line, "I'm sorry for what I did, I don't know why I did it," is one of those. Or from watching his neighbor George skin a fox, which turned out to inspire his taxidermy works. So I'm going to go back to 1986 and 87 to that clown, to the Whitechapel essay. And I was facing the problem of how do you approach a whole body of work, or at least a diverse body of work, and if not the whole of it, the many works that are included in anybody's checklist that's trying to survey the territory, and I was stuck. And I wanted to figure out a lead that would lead me not into a corner where I couldn't get out, and same for the audience. And finally, I came up with a joke that I'd heard, or a kid's game, and it didn't seem inappropriate, since Nauman has often used kids' games, such as hangman or musical chairs. And the joke, I'll tell you what the joke is. The essay begins, Pete and Repeat were sitting on a fence. Pete fell off. Who was left? Repeat. Pete and Repeat were sitting on a fence. Who fell off? Repeat. Yeah. Pete and Repeat were sitting on a fence. Okay, so typically I sent the essay to the studio for fact-checking. Went under the whole process of copy editing and so forth, and I got something in the mail from Nauman, which was a video, and it had no note, but it said this.
Sit on a fence, people walk to his left, repeat, sit on a fence, people walk to his left, repeat, sit on a fence, people walk to his left. He and repeat were sitting on a fence and Pete falling to his left. Pete and repeat were sitting on a fence and Pete falling.
Be careful, he might point at you. He might wait.
So, fast forward to the show. The film director, Michael Blackwood, and I went there to film Nauman for his part of this 4-artist film. We were going to shoot the sculptures and the videos and so forth at the museum. And given the scale of the sculpture and the noise from the videos and the noise from the neons and the flashing, we did the interview in a hotel. And as would happen, there was a power outage in the hotel that day. But fortunately, Michael had a battery-powered, we always have this technical stuff today is no different than any other day. Michael had a battery-powered voice recorder, and we had a candle and bourbon, and the darkness was a little brighter. So by the time the show opened, Pete and Repeat had become a video, actually, one of 4 that were part of his clown torture installation, installed in a room but using 3 walls, presented the videos on monitors as projections. And the action in the other videos was this: a clown repeating "no, no," along with "I'm sorry," a clown balancing a fishbowl on a pole up against the ceiling until he tired and it fell, a clown being doused with a bucket of water over, each of them over and over and over again. So what was originally going to be an exhibition became a film called 4 Artists, Robert Ryman, Eva Hess, Bruce Nauman, and Susan Rothenberg. Now, I'll show you an excerpt of the film for a couple of reasons, to indicate what Nauman's thinking was at the time, to get a little bit of a glimpse of the show. But I should say something about both the show and the film had the same concept, which was, here were 4 artists who had done major work, major turning points, not only in their own practices, but for how we understand contemporary art. And each of the segments was shot separately. The artists didn't meet each other. For Eva Hess, who had died in 1970, I interviewed other artists about her work and used vintage film clips that hadn't been seen and voice recordings. But there was another reason for bringing these 4 together, which is, I realize, very relevant today. Both Rothenberg and Hess had made extremely important work. And though the work of many women had begun to be shown in the 70s, it was not a secret by the mid-80s that their presence was vanishing again. And the decade actually opened with a show that heralded all this new work in 1982 called Zeitgeist. And if it showcased the spirit of the age, it did it in more ways than one, than signaling the new expressionist history-type painting that was coming to the fore. Rothenberg was the only woman in the show. The other 44 artists were men. And she vowed at that time she would never allow that to happen again. If a curator asked her to be in a group show, she would recommend colleagues to them, suggest they go to the studio, but it wasn't going to happen again. And in 1985, just to stay off point for a moment and digress, but to give the context to the moment in the mid-'80s, the Guerrilla Girls began to do their work. And the very first poster that they put up in the spring of 1985 was to document the virtual absence of artists, women artists, in museums. And the first one had the banner that showed a female nude with a gorilla mask, with the banner, "Do women have to be nude to get into the Met Museum? Less than 4% of artists in the modern art section are women. but 76% of the nudes are female. Now, over the years, the Guerrilla Girls have upped the statistics with the same, and a few years later it said 6%, but anyway. But back to the four artists. These interviews, first there was the show, then there was the film, then there were the interviews, and then they were published. And they were condensed and edited. And I very often like seeing these things turn up as footnotes or in collected volumes or whatever. And I think I'm going to talk a little bit of context again, because one of the lines from this interview that gets published over and over and over is the one about getting hit in the back of the neck with a baseball bat. And when it's used like a soundbite, it's often used to talk about Nauman's works that really do address violence, like Violent Incident, but it's often used about works that have nothing to do with it or allude to it, like Violence, Silence. And then people forget that there are a lot of Nauman works, like The Corridors, that are silent, have no sound, no shouting, no screaming. And in some of the corridors, they actually have sound absorptive material. So I thought, just for the hell of it, I'd read you his full comment of why he used that phrase. What he was really talking about was the impact of the work of the jazz musician Lennie Tristano. So here's the whole quote. Lennie Tristano was a blind pianist, one of the original or maybe the second generation bebop guys. He's on a lot of the early best bebop records. When Lennie played well, he hit you hard, and he kept going until he finished. Then he just quit. You don't get any introduction, you didn't get any tail, you just got full intensity for 2 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever. It would be like taking the middle out of Coltrane, just the hardest, toughest part of it. That was all you got. From the beginning, I was trying to see if I could make art that did that, art that was just there all at once, like getting hit in the face with a baseball bat, or better, like getting hit in the back of the neck. You never see it coming. It just knocks you down. I like that very idea very much, the kind of intensity that doesn't give you any trace of whether you're going to like it or not. So this is a little bit from the trailer.
Some artists do function in relation to beauty, try and make beautiful things and are moved by beautiful things. But I know I don't work that way. My work does come out of being frustrated about the human condition, how people refuse to understand other people, how people can be cruel to each other. And it's not even that I'm interested in thinking that I can change that, but it's such a frustrating part of the human condition.
So the reason the Eva Hess is there, I learned in the last years since I've been working on film, even more than on books, is that editors save space by running words into the next image. And if I didn't show the last Eva Hess image, you wouldn't hear the last words of Nauman. To break with chronology, I'm going to show you some works from 215, and this is, I'm going to show three different constellations. This is the Cartier Foundation in 2015. I think I'll tell you what you're going to see because it's not exactly clear. This is the ground floor of the Cartier Foundation on Boulevard Raspail in Paris. The whole largest gallery on the first floor of this building, designed by Jean Nouvel, was devoted to one work of Nauman's. And you'll see pretty quickly why, if you had to pick one word to describe him that was an artist, it would be sculptor, because of the way he addresses the space, the scale of the space, the scale of the videos. So I'll just play this so you can take a walk through the show on the ground floor. No, I won't.
Sa volonté, en installant l'exposition ici, c'était de répondre à l'architecture du lieu. Et donc il a pensé des œuvres, une sélection d'œuvres et le déploiement de ces œuvres en fonction des espaces du bâtiment de Jean Nouvel, et notamment au rez-de-chaussée avec ces grands espaces transparents.
So, this is a two-panel video, and the size of it is, it measures 4 meters high by 14 meters wide, each panel, which is, each LED screen is roughly 13 feet high and 46 feet wide. Now, the two videos, the one on the right was shot in Bruce's office in his studio with a little iPhone against his chest, while he was holding two pencils and lifting the little one in the middle. The one at the left was redone later, very professional production with a man named Bruce Hamilton, with whom Bruce Nauman works very often to solve and brainstorm what technology to use to get Nauman's vision into the world. I mean, he can think things up and the two of them together figure out how to show it. Both of them deal with something called the parallax effect. And in a little bit, I'll show you how to do it so you understand what's going on, because reading about it doesn't make any sense. All right, I think it's time to show you how to do the parallax effect, because he used it in his works, his architectural works in the 70s, and he uses it in this series. Could you turn on the lights? Okay, if you put your thumbs out, your hands out, and hold your thumbs together about ½ an inch apart. Any two fingers will do, but thumbs are easy. And then look at the gap, but don't focus on the gap. Look a little above it and a little beyond it. And you'll start to see something floating there if you take a little bit of time. I think people are seeing it. You see your Vienna sausage? Yeah, that's it. That's what you got. So he wanted to replicate this effect, and to do it in a video, we really had to fake it. So he and Bruce Hamilton faked it a number of ways. So this one, that's also a diptych, and he's faking it, but demonstrating what happens when you try to perfect your hands. And now these are two videos. At the left, he's trying to capture the effect with 3 bullets. And those are the pencils that you saw from the first gigantic video. That's a collage testing the 3 bullets. That's a drawing. And another collage testing the output. So this is a photo that Bruce sent to me in December. Anybody who knows his work from way back or even recently knows one of his most famous works is him walking in a long, narrow corridor for a video called Walk with Contrapposto. And, was curious why he was focusing on this, talking about it a lot. But it had everything to do with, he was thinking about the Contrapposto works again. He had recently made many videos, which I'll show you. He was in the midst of thinking about a new one that sounds like it will be the most complicated technology he's ever used, especially compared to his iPhone. And actually, that iPhone footage, he thought the quality was so good if you download it directly into your computer that you can go up to the scale of those billboards. Even if I knew more about what the new one is, I couldn't say. I think its title is Contrapposto Split, but in any case, the press release is going to come out in the next week because it's going to be in the big Nauman retrospective that is being organized by the Schaulager and the Museum of Modern Art, and it will open in March in Basel, and it will come to New York in the fall. So the title of this sculpture, I will tell you what it is, and also I'm going to work backwards, peeling the onion to show a number of iterations of this particular one. So the sculpture is by Rodin, and it's titled Pair of Standing Nude Male Figures Demonstrating the Principles of Contrapposto According to Michelangelo and Phidias, from approximately 1911. And then, of course, this happens whenever something crosses my path. I had to find out a little more. So for curators who are looking at provenance and things like that, this work came into the Met via the Cantors, Gerald and Iris Cantor, but the piece itself had been in the collection of Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, who I'm interested in both because of her work in sculpture, monumental work in sculpture and outdoors, and also as the founder of the Whitney Museum of American Art. But Rodin had given her these when she visited his studio in 1911 at the Hotel Biron. So these are the most recent, prior to the one we don't know about yet, explorations of walk with Contrapposto. And it's so complicated that I'm actually going to read from the short description from the press release because it's very, very precise, and I assume it's because Juliet and Bruce and worked with the gallery to be sure that it is exact and precise. So, Contrapposto Studies 1 through 7 consist of 7 large-scale, high-definition video projections and sound. In each projection, Nauman walks in contrapposto, seen either frontally or in profile across the projections. His image is repeated and rendered in both positive and negative while walking backwards and forwards, respectively. At times, the repeated images of the artist's body become fragmented and stacked in 2 distinct directions. Each projection is accompanied by the sound of the artist's movements as well as the ancillary studio sounds resulting from the filming and editing process. Now, this is called Performance Corridor, and it's the very first freestanding architectural corridor that Nauman presented publicly. It also was a prop originally for a video in which he walked down the corridor and back, performing his contrapposto walk. The prop was in his studio that he had used temporarily in Southampton when he lived in New York for a very short time. He's mostly been on the West Coast. And Marcia suggested, as far as I know, that why didn't he just show the prop? And Bruce said, all right, right? He would say something like that. So the piece, the prop, the thing, was rebuilt for the Whitney, shipped to the Whitney, and it was in Marcia Tucker's exhibition in 1969, Anti-Illusion Procedures Materials, at the Whitney Museum of American Art. Nauman, of course, didn't perform in it. Visitors to the exhibition could go in and out of the corridor. There were no explicit instructions. No one had to do the walk with Contrapposto. Probably no one else knew about it except for other artists in his circle. And though the lineage of these Contrapposto works usually stops with the video, and these are stills from the video, Nauman was recorded with a camera at the very front of the corridor from on high. Actually, there was a piece before it, and it was not a video, but it was a film. I'm not going to show you that film, but I am going to show you something else. And I first came across it because it was one of these homages to Nauman that just makes me laugh every time I've seen it. When I watched it in time again for this, I just kept thinking, every time anybody looks at Nauman, something new strikes you. You think of his drawing, make me think, which he says to himself and to us. And if you look at the video that I'm about to show you, that's a mashup of his Nauman's 16 millimeter film from 67, 68. That is called, let me give you the exact title. I don't want to just say it out loud incorrectly. Well, anyway, it's about walking around the perimeter of a square in an exaggerated manner. Oh, the reason that I'm showing it is it's the best example to see him walking around the square and doing this gesture.
Cada no seu quadrado, cada no seu quadrado. 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 Eu disse ado, cada no seu quadrado. Ado, cada no seu quadrado. Saci no seu quadrado, saci no seu quadrado. Saci no seu quadrado, saci no seu quadrado. Saci com giratória, saci com giratória. Saci com giratória, saci com giratória. Cláudio Bochecha no seu quadrado, Cláudio Bochecha no seu quadrado. Cláudio Bochecha no seu quadrado, Cláudio Bochecha no seu quadrado. Cláudio Bochecha com giratória, Cláudio Bochecha com giratória.
So the title of that is Walking in an Exaggerated Manner Around the Periphery of the Square, and it's from 1967 to 1968. What's that? Oh, you want to know his name? I'll tell you. I'm going to tell you. His name is Pedro Victor Brandao. Whoops.
I've said this thing that I always thought was a quote from Roy Lichtenstein when he started the comic book paintings, and he said there wasn't anything else to do, and I had to do something. And I feel that sometimes. I'm an artist. I want to be in the studio. I want to be doing something. You just get desperate, and so you just do whatever's at hand, and you don't even worry about whether it's going to be interesting or not interesting to anybody else, or even yourself. You just have to make something. I suspect I got that quote from Roy Lichtenstein completely wrong. It was just a creative misquote, but it's really useful, so it's great. Don't worry about it.
This is one of his hands drawings called All Thumbs, and I'm going to run through just two other series. One is the staircases. This was a model. The first one is a model, but that actually really was a sculpture. The next one was actually built as an outdoor work in Bellingham, Washington. And it marked the beginning of his relationship with builder Steve Oliver, who poured the concrete, worked with Bruce on the specs. And soon after, Nancy and Steve Oliver commissioned a work for the Oliver Ranch. And this is the staircase that he did there. The staircase is made up of 300 steps, and the treads and risers. The treads are all the same size, but the risers vary from like an inch to 2 feet. So when you walk down the stairs, you have to be very, very careful. Here, the idea of the piece was that it would go straight from the bottom of the hill up the road to their house. And to go there, people gather. You join an organization, an event, a not-for-profit organization, and the price of admission is you pay a contribution to this, whatever organization is doing it. You can go to the website, sign up on anyone, and people are taken from up to the ranch with a bus, and as you're going around these hairpin turns, you actually, she's walking onto the road, you first feel Nauman's staircase when the bus hits the speed bump, because it crosses that to go to the rest of the ranch. Nauman's The True Artist works are some of his most famous, and they're variations. Sometimes it's The True Artist is an amazing luminous fountain. Sometimes it's The True Artist reveals mystic truths. And this is the window or wall shade in kind of rose-colored mylar. So it's pretty important about how he thought of those variations, whether it's, a neon, a drawing, or the wall sign, or whether the words varies. And what he said about it is this. These words are like a test. When spoken aloud, one must think about whether they are true. Both works were inspired by a beer sign that hung in the window of a San Francisco studio, which had previously been a grocery store.
A good teacher is like a good artist. They go right to the most difficult part of whatever's going on.
sorry, I'm going to interrupt that to tell you that's the model for the Oliver Ranch staircase that Bruce built on his own ranch.
A good teacher is like a good artist. They go right to the most difficult part of whatever's going on, the painting or the sculpture, and goes right to that spot. And I knew how to do that in my work, or I hoped I did, and I didn't know how to do that with horses. I didn't see the connection. When I was in school, Wayne Thiebaud was teaching, and I was his teaching assistant, and that's what Wayne did. He taught people how to pay attention.
So the last words are to thank everyone here for giving us the chance to see the San Jose corridor, think about it, and I will leave the last words, as always, to Nauman.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank
Thank you, Joan. Our next speaker is Dr. Gwen Allen, Associate Professor at San Francisco State University, where she specializes in contemporary art, criticism, and visual culture. She has written about art and design for publications, including Art Forum, Book Forum, Art Journal, Art Margins, Art in America, Art Papers, CAA Reviews, and East of Borneo. She has contributed essays to numerous books, monographs, and exhibition catalogs, including Design as Social Practice, In Power to the People, The Graphic Design of Radical Press, and the Rise of the Counterculture, 1964 to 74, University of Chicago Press, 2013, and The Politics of Indeterminacy, The Art of Gary Simmons in Gary Simmons' Paradise, Metro Pictures, 2012, the catalog as an exhibition space in the 1960s and 70s in When Attitudes Become Form, Bern, 1969, Venice, 2013, Prada Foundation, 2013. She's the author of Artist Magazines and International Space, an Alternative Space for Art, MIT Press, 2011, and recently edited the magazine in the Documents of Contemporary Art series, MIT Press and Whitechapel Gallery, 2016. Gwen.
Thank you so much, Tori, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this discussion. So I am going to be talking about Avalanche Magazine, which is the magazine that published a lengthy interview with Bruce Nauman in which he discusses the San Jose installation at length, along with several photographs that document the installation. And I'm showing you the winter 1971 issue of the magazine, which featured a photograph of Nauman on the cover. Can you hear me okay? Is that okay? The mic's okay. And, I just want to say before I get started that this was really, really interesting for me because I've been working on Avalanche for quite a while, and wrote a book on magazines, and one of the chapters is on Avalanche. So I'm, quite familiar with the magazine, and yet kind of looking at it, returning to that material, looking at it through the lens of this exhibition, of this installation, looking at that interview and that issue in particular, it really, I felt like I was seeing new things, and so that's been really a wonderful opportunity to be able to do that with material and kind of the point of this kind of an exhibition. So thank you. So this is the cover of the magazine Avalanche. This is the first page of the interview itself, which again was videotaped here at San Jose State University while Nauman was installing the piece. And the original videotape was lost until very recently when Dory unearthed it along with other documentation pertaining to the installation. The video is in the gallery with the installation, so you can also see the entire thing. So, until recently, this magazine interview and the photographs accompanying it were the main historical record of the installation. But more than that, even at the time in 1970, it's quite likely that more people witnessed or experienced the installation through the magazine than saw it in person. So today I want to explore how the published interview in Avalanche informed and inflected the meaning of Nauman's San Jose installation by thinking about the history of Avalanche itself and about the role of magazines more generally in art of this period. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the magazine itself, the role of magazines, and then I'll come back to the Nauman interview in particular and that issue and talk a little bit more specifically about that. So Avalanche was founded by Willoughby Sharp and Liza Baer in 1970. Sharp was then working as a curator, most famous for having curated the important Earth Art exhibition at Cornell University in 1969, and that was the exhibition through which Earth Art really became a thing. Baer was was a British editor and writer who met Sharp while running an errand on a trip to New York. So they met very serendipitously. Here they are shown in their loft at 93 Grand Street in Soho, which served as the magazine's headquarters. According to Sharp, they named the magazine Avalanche because they wanted it to represent, quote, a cultural breakthrough, to reconfigure, break down the old structure, suggesting how the magazine was conceived of as a kind of challenge to the existing art world at the time. The geological metaphor was also a reference to Earth Art, which they featured in the first issue, publishing a lengthy interview with Robert Smithson, Dennis Oppenheim, and Michael Heiser, with page upon page of full-bleed photographs of this work, as you can see in these spreads. And such photographs were, again, really crucial to this art, which was so often located outside of galleries and museums in remote areas such as the desert in the Southwest. Robert Smithson actually considered the magazine what he called a non-site, so a kind of site that wasn't the actual, sculpture, but that was kind of, for him, kind of equivalent, different but equal. As the art historian David Rosend observed of the newly important role of art magazines during this period, quote, you read it, but you read it because it told you what was going on, partly because so much of what was going on was not to be seen in galleries. So Avalanche was one of a number of magazines founded during this era, which functioned as a kind of museum without walls for these new conceptual practices. And I'm showing you just a few. This is File, Art Right, 0 to 9, which was published by Vito Acconci, and Heresies, which is a feminist art magazine. Some magazines even experimented with new formats to become almost like miniature traveling galleries. And this is Aspen, which was a multimedia magazine that came in a cardboard box and contained all kinds of documents, films, artist multiples, kind of suggesting how the magazine was becoming a new kind of medium or primary site for this art. However, magazines such as Avalanche also supported the experimental art of this period in other, less literal ways, by fostering artistic communities, critical dialogue, and encouraging various kinds of institutional and public support, including new galleries, new alternative spaces, audiences, and markets. At a moment when mainstream art magazines such as Art Forum were increasingly seen as market-driven and promotional, Avalanche set out to support the new emerging art, and in particular the downtown art scene in Soho, which is where it was based, but also art in California, art internationally. The magazine actually had a German issue that was published and distributed in Germany. So it was really, even though it was very much based in Soho, it was also about creating a dialogue out with art outside of Soho, whether that was in California again or in Europe or elsewhere. And so the magazine aimed to be a direct channel for the artist's own voice. That was really one of the main missions, to provide an opportunity for artists to talk back to their critics and to participate more fully in the discourse surrounding their work. The choice to put a close-up shot of an artist's face on the cover of each issue and I'm showing you, this is Joseph Beuys. This is the first cover. This really reflected the artist-centered character of the magazine, and here are a few others. In addition to Beuys and Nauman, we have Yvonne Rainer, Lawrence Weiner, William Wegman was represented by his dog and collaborator, Man Ray. In any case, according to Sharp, the magazine's mission was, quote, to amplify the artists, not merely by putting their faces on the cover, but to go into some kind of a dialogue with them and find out how the magazine could serve them. Accordingly, the magazine published no criticism. Instead, it published lengthy interviews with artists in which they were given abundant time and space to talk frankly about their work in their own words, without the mediation of critics. These interviews were notable for their length and for the detail that they go into. According to Liza Baer, who transcribed and edited most of the interviews were carefully edited to preserve each artist's idiom and the nuances of spoken conversation. It's kind of paradoxical that they're carefully edited to seem, lifelike. But so as a result, the Avalanche interviews convey something of the process of thinking out loud. They sometimes ramble the way real conversations do. Often they capture the rhythms and cadences of natural speech, including stutters and pauses, emphatic expressions that are often omitted from such interviews. Many also convey a sense of sociability, taking place over a meal or over the course of a long afternoon, perhaps involving drinking whiskey and smoking pot, as was the case with the interview with Ed Ruscha, which I'm showing you here. And just as a little aside, I think it's really fascinating to see the actual videotape of Nauman's interview. And Dory writes about this in the essay for the book that's coming out, and I had the chance to read that as well. I think it's really fascinating what was actually left out, and you draw attention to that in your interview, in your essay. And I hadn't really, I hadn't listened to a lot of this material. The archival material was actually not available when I was originally working on this, and so it really is interesting to compare that. And I think it's interesting, we can maybe talk about that during the discussion to return to that question. But in any case, to greater or lesser degrees, they do try to capture that kind of aliveness of the interviews. Avalanche also gave artists a chance to experiment with using the magazine page as a medium and exhibition space to publish their own writings, as well as process documents and works in progress. So here's a documentation of a performance by Gordon Matta Clark and Solowit's page drawing, which was an interactive piece that invited readers to draw on the page. Instead of exhibition reviews, Avalanche had a section called Rumbles, which was compiled by the editors from correspondence they received from artists around the world, kind of a community newsletter or bulletin board where artists posted their events and performances, as well as more personal information. And these are just fascinating to read. They have things, performances and, but very obscure performances, but also like where people are spending the summer and, births, deaths, really kind of very personal information. And so it is a really different, kind of an experience than something like, reviews section in Art Forum or something like that. Avalanche's attempt to challenge the art world power structure and to create alternative models of art and art criticism also has to be understood in relationship to the larger politicization of the art world in the 60s and 70s. And it reflects the growing demand by artists for more control in the display and distribution of their work. Such demands catalyzed the formation of numerous activist groups in the late 1960s, including the Art Workers Coalition, which Willoughby Sharp and Liza Baer, the editors of Avalanche, were involved in founding. In addition to demanding that artists have more control over the exhibition and sale of their work, and that museums be more inclusive towards women, people of color, and working people, the Art Workers Coalition protested larger social and political issues, including the war in Vietnam, with their famous "And Babies" poster. And I'm showing here several of the Art Workers Coalition members protesting in front of Picasso's Guernica, holding up this poster, which is, essentially an image of the My Lai massacre. So it's a very chilling image. And it was distributed widely around the world, including in magazines as well. Well, such politics were not always explicitly visible in art itself of this period. They are visible in the magazine. For example, this is an anti-war message that was printed as an advertisement in the first issue of Avalanche. The magazine was also deeply connected to other so-called alternative spaces and artist spaces that proliferated in Soho and across the country in the 1970s. And these spaces offered new ways of making and exhibiting work outside the venues and markets of the mainstream art world. Many of these spaces advertised in Avalanche, and I'm showing you an interview here with Jeffrey Liu and Alan Serra about the space 112 Green Street, in which they discussed the ideological impetus behind these spaces in opposition to the White Cube Gallery. And so magazines like Avalanche operated alongside and in tandem with these bricks and mortars alternative spaces to support and publicize this new work. I think it's interesting also, something else we can talk about afterwards, but to think about how, like a university gallery, like this gallery here, where do we position that within this alternative network of artist spaces at the moment? Because they are very different from, a museum or commercial gallery space. And so anyway, I think that's another kind of interesting thing to think about that I had not really thought about until this opportunity. At the same time, I think it's, Avalanche's relationship to the mainstream art world and the market was complicated. When I asked Willoughby Sharp about the magazine's anti-market stance, he kind of looked at me like I was crazy and said, "Are you kidding? I was trying to get artists into the market." So we tend to think of these magazines and these spaces as being very kind of different outside of that or against the market, but they were also, as alternatives, they were ultimately trying to become part of the mainstream art world. And yet, at the same time, a lot of the galleries that published in Avalanche were less established than the kind of uptown blue chip galleries. And a number of galleries also took out blank pages as advertisements to support the magazine without promoting their own gallery or promoting a particular artist, say. So to return to the Nauman interview published in the second issue of Avalanche, among other things, I think it prompts us to reflect upon the status of the magazine as a historical document, and it raises questions about what kind of document it is. In the process of working on this exhibition, as I mentioned, Dory, unearthed the original videotape, which is now on view, of this interview, as well as the contact sheet of photographs that were taken by Gianfranco Gorgoni. And, I actually I haven't seen all of the photographs, and I was able to watch the videotape today, but from what I understand, a lot is left out of the published interview, and a lot of the photographs in particular are highly edited for this interview, and so it leaves out a large part of the story, including many of the other people involved, faculty and students who were involved in the installation. At the same time, however partial and edited, I think the magazine also provides certain kinds of information that might otherwise be missing from our understanding of the work. So this is the interview itself, which is 14 pages long and accompanied by 10 photographs, along with 4 pages of stills from Nauman's videos. It begins by discussing the San Jose piece, and then it moves into other of the artist's works and his process more generally, and then it returns to the San Jose installation at the end. And I think, like many of the Avalanche interviews, it's remarkable for the sustained attention it gives to artistic process and intent. And when you listen to the actual interview, it's pretty intense. I think Willoughby Sharp is really interested, and they really want to talk about what that was like, what that experience was like to be in the installation. At the same time, I think part of what the magazine contributes to our understanding of the piece has less to do with the information we glean about the installation itself than with the social, historical, and artistic context in which it gained meaning. So, for example, this is an ad that was taken out in this issue of the magazine by the National Peace Action Coalition for an anti-war march, which suggests the political activities that Nauman, along with so many of these artists, were involved in at the time. Another ad publicizes the scandal over the censorship of Daniel Buren's work at the 6th Guggenheim International Exhibition, again suggesting the tensions between artists and mainstream art institutions at the time. We see an advertisement for Nauman's upcoming one-man show at Leo Castelli here on the left, and that's on the kind of, so when you open the magazine, you see the cover, and then on the reverse of the cover is this ad. So that's the first thing you really see in the magazine, and it kind of echoes his own, again, the portrait, the face shot, the glamour shot of Bruce Nauman, what else? Oh, and then towards the back of the magazine, actually, so on the right, I'm showing you another ad at the back of the magazine for it's an announcement for a video exhibition that Nauman was included in that took place at Breen's Bar in San Francisco, which I guess was a really important bar years ago. It's now closed, but the video show had taken place the previous October. So it's kind of interesting to me that given that, this issue of the magazine came out after the video exhibition was over, so it's functioned solely for posterity's sake as a record rather than as an advertisement trying to get people to see the show, which is generally how you think of these ads functioning. So that was kind of interesting to realize for me. So the entire issue of this, issue 2, was devoted to body art, which we know only really from an announcement in the previous issue, I'm showing you here, that says Avalanche 2, or it's body sculpture, actually it says. And so it doesn't really, in that issue, I don't think it really references that, but we know it from this previous ad. In addition to interviews by Nauman, or the interview by Nauman, it included an interview with the San Francisco-based conceptual artist Terry Fox, a photo essay and writings by William Wegman, documentation of a number of performances by Vito Acconci, along with his writings, and documentation of Yves Klein's anthropometries, and other things as well. But this is, some highlights of what else was in that issue. Strikingly, there are no women artists featured in this issue, aside from the human paintbrushes that Yves Klein used in his performance. Nor were there any women artists in issue 1, nor would there be any women artists in issue 3 of the magazine. There is, however, an advertisement taken out by the artist Marjorie Strider, which shows the artist topless riding a horse. And this is kind of towards the end of the magazine. So, apparently the only way a woman could get her work into the pages of the magazine was to pay for an ad. And there's a whole other, and take your clothes off, right? But I am not showing, there are other examples, other really interesting, including the Linda Banglis ad, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Judy Chicago took out an ad in art form. So there are other examples of this. You could, anyway, there's more to say about that. Another symposium, exactly. So in conclusion, in these many different ways, Avalanche sheds light on the historical, social, and political context within which Nauman's installation was created and gained meaning. And yet, just as having the opportunity to see the actual piece as it originally existed in the gallery will no doubt yield new insights into the piece. So the magazine as a document is not stable over time, but really changes according to our perspective today. And I think, restaging this installation actually also allows us to see the magazine itself differently in this kind of reverse circular way. So I hope we can talk more about some of that during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gwen. See some themes emerging. Our next speaker is Ted Mann. He received his BA from Williams College and his MA and MPhil in art history from the Institute of Fine Arts, New York University. From 2004 to 2008, he worked as assistant curator for collections at the Solomon Guggenheim Museum in New York. Since 2010, he has worked as an assistant curator on the Guggenheim's Panza Collection Initiative, a joint curatorial and conservation project funded by the Andrew Mellon Foundation, which is designed to address the long-term preservation and future display of artworks of the 1960s and 70s. Bruce Nauman is one of the 7 artists whose work has been a focus on the initiative. Since moving to the Bay Area in 2014, Mann has continued as a consultant for the Guggenheim's Panza Initiative while also working on several other projects. He is contributing author to the forthcoming book with Constance Llewellyn, of which I'm co-author, Bruce Nauman, Spatial Encounters, for which he wrote an essay on Nauman's drawings. Please welcome Ted Mann.
Thanks. Thank you, Dory. And thank you all for coming out this evening. So as Dory indicated, my relation to the San Jose corridor is through the Guggenheim and the work that I've been doing the past several years on the Guggenheim's Panza collection. The piece that was installed here by Nauman in 1970 is one of about 25 corridors, rooms, and other architectural type installations by Nauman, which were purchased by the Italian collector Giuseppe Panza during the 1970s. And this group of works was later acquired by the Guggenheim as part of a much larger purchase by purchase and partial gift in the early 1990s. So many of these works, like the San Jose corridor, have a very long and complex history, having been installed at a variety of sites over the years, in some cases literally dozens of times. One of my roles in the Panza collection, which Dory referred to, has been to reconstruct this history in as much detail as possible for each artwork, relying on a number of different archives. In the course of my research, I've been especially interested in the role of drawings within Nauman's practice and the multiple roles that they perform, both in terms of the conception and development of the works, as well as in their transmission and staging together in tandem with the actual corridors. But this evening I want to focus on something different but related, and that is the maquettes or mock-ups that the artist produced for his corridors and rooms in the studio. This is a topic I came to as I kept encountering references to these, as well as unpublished photographs in correspondence in various archives. So past publications and monographs on Nauman have mentioned the mock-ups, to be sure, but generally only in passing. So it's a subject I feel that begs more attention, and that, like the drawings, can actually tell us quite a lot about the artworks themselves. I want to start by way of the San Jose corridor itself. So the current installation here in the Thompson Gallery is unusual, in that, as far as I know, there's only one other instance in which one of Nauman's corridors has been reconstructed in the exact location of its first exhibition. That other work, Greenlight Corridor, is something I'll return to shortly. In speaking about the 1970 corridor, it's tempting to refer to it as the original. However, to speak of an original in this case is problematic. First of all, as the curators of this exhibition acknowledge, the whole language of originals and copies does not apply to artworks which were conceived to be built, destroyed, and rebuilt as necessary, and which may vary slightly with each installation. In the case of the San Jose corridor, we're talking about a work that has been reinstalled at 5 other venues since 1970. Less than a year after San Jose, it was shown at the Gallery Eliane Sonnabend in Paris, and unfortunately that's an exhibition for which we have no documentation, no photographs have been found. In 1989 and 1990, in 2 exhibitions of Giuseppe Panza's collection in Saint-Étienne in Paris, with the rather kind of idiosyncratic installation, but Ponce added a platform floor. And as we were discussing a little earlier with his studio manager, Juliet, who's going to be speaking next, he also had a tendency to kind of overly refine the work using, very fine custom plywood. Nevertheless, in 1997, it was shown at the Guggenheim Bilbao, and finally in 2003 at the Deutsche Guggenheim Berlin. We might even include a temporary construction which was built in the Guggenheim storage facility solely for the purpose of photography in the Berlin catalog. So as you can see, the work has sometimes been built along an existing room wall, as here at the Thompson Gallery, and sometimes as a freestanding structure, which is a configuration that appears in a number of the artist's drawings from the 1970s, or from 1970. Rather than copies after a 1970 original, all of these passing realizations, including the 1970 construction, are more accurately described as iterations. They may be more or less successful or in line with what the artist originally envisioned, or initially envisioned, I should say, but no one iteration can lay claim to bearing the most authenticity necessarily. But even if we understand original to refer simply to chronological precedence, it's still not accurate to call the structure that Nauman built here in San Jose during the first week of May 1970 the original, because even that was preceded by another physical manifestation, a full-scale maquette in the studio. Here I'm showing a detail of a contact sheet for a series of photos by which Gianfranco Gorgoni took in Nauman's Pasadena studio in April 1970, so immediately prior to the exhibition here in San Jose. To my knowledge, these photos have never before been published, and Gorgoni very generously allowed us to look at scans of his contact sheets, and we're actually going to be reproducing 2 whole contact sheets in the book. One of them from these studio photos and one from the installation here in San Jose. Although it's somewhat difficult to make out, visible in the background of several of the shots is a double corridor which converges at one end in a V. In some other images you can see this a little better, but the quality of the scans was poor, so I chose this one. There's a moment in the 1970 interview with Sharp when Nauman refers to this construction. The artist is explaining how the mirror was originally somewhat taller at 6 feet, and how he subsequently decided to reduce it to 5.5 feet so that someone his height could feel the space behind the mirror. When Sharp asks him if he usually makes such changes in the process of actually building a work, Nauman's response is, "Yeah, I first made that piece in my studio." Based on the photographs, the studio version appears to correspond to the mock-up for another closely related work, Acoustic Wedge, Sound Wedge, Double Wedge. And here I'm showing the photo that was reproduced in Joan Simon's 1994 catalog raisonné. This other work, which was not exhibited publicly until 1989, has the same general form and dimensions as the San Jose piece, but rather than a mirror at its apex, the interior walls are lined with acoustic paneling, or basically sound dampening or soundproofing material. One drawing from 1970 supports the idea that Nauman developed the San Jose corridor by essentially modifying this other piece. As you can see, in the plan view at the top, Nauman shows a corridor that combines acoustic paneling and a mirror, as well as a mirror. He ultimately, there seems to have decided that he could eliminate the acoustic paneling and just feature the mirror in the San Jose installation. The use of full-scale one-to-one maquettes to test out and develop the works in this way, in concert with the drawings, was not limited to the San Jose corridor and the acoustic wedge. Rather, it constituted a critical part of Nauman's process for all of the corridor and room installations. In a 1975 interview, Nauman explained that building a mock-up was usually the only way I can get a feel of the scale and the size of a given piece. Here I'm just showing some other views, again, from Gorgoni's contact sheets. In what is probably the most extensive reference to the mock-ups as a group that has been published to date, just a few sentences in a 1986 essay, Kosha van Bruggen suggests that this practice may have been motivated by the particular studio space that the artist acquired after moving to Pasadena in mid-1969. The studio, which Nauman remained in until his move to New Mexico a full decade later, was a large loft on the second floor of an industrial building. According to Van Bruggen, the difficulty in getting heavier materials like steel and lumber up from the ground floor led the artist to focus on planning corridor installations with wallboard and small pieces of wood, rather than producing large-scale sculptures. The beginning of the corridors themselves, of course, predates Nauman's move to Pasadena, with the exhibition of Performance Corridor in New York in early 1969, something I'll return to. Regardless, the space, the relatively lightweight nature of these materials, and Nauman's proficiency with basic construction techniques meant that the artist could easily manipulate wallboard and wood bracing, together with acoustic padding, mirrors, closed-circuit video cameras and monitors, and fluorescent lights, to work out a whole range of possible architectural installations by himself. Not surprisingly, the studio maquettes tend to be relatively rough and makeshift in appearance. In the 1970 interview, Nauman recalls that his studio version of the mirror corridor was, quote, much cruder than the version built in San Jose, for which he had the assistance of a whole team of individuals. The contrast between the mock-up and the exhibited work is especially evident in the case of another work, Acoustic Pressure Piece. The photo I'm showing here appears to be one of the earliest studio maquettes, dating from September 1969, a 40-foot row of staggered 8-foot-tall acoustic panels. And the artist documented this in the drawing on the right, which actually refers to as installed in the studio. When the piece was first installed, or first exhibited, I should say, 2 years later at Leo Castelli Gallery, the relatively crude struts of the studio version were replaced by a more regular bracing system, which now included floorboards for visitors to step on. Additionally, at Castelli, the piece crossed through a doorway into the gallery's second back room and then angled to the right. Nevertheless, despite the changes made at the time of the Castelli exhibition, the studio mock-up enabled Nauman to determine how to achieve the particular physical and perceptual effects that he sought. In this case, a sense of feeling, of creating a kind of changing pressure on the body through sound dampening. By far the most widely published photograph of a studio mock-up is this shot on the left, taken by Frank J. Thomas, an LA-based photographer, in the fall of 1970, which shows Nauman in his mock-up for Greenlight Corridor. And on the right, I'm showing a different color shot, which was apparently taken during the same session by Thomas. At just 1 foot wide, this corridor is one of Nauman's narrowest. The artist's position, about a third of the way into the passage and turned sideways, illustrates how the piece forces the spectator to perform an awkward crab walk in order to pass through to the other end. Although it is in black and white, Thomas's primary photo also captures the intensity of the green fluorescent light, which is contained and directed down into the narrow passage by flanged metal reflectors. Thomas's carefully staged photographs, like Gorgoni's, are the exceptions, however. When photographs of a mock-up exist at all, they were usually taken by the artist himself, apparently as a means, along with the drawings, of conveying information about the works to curators and dealers, and potentially even collectors. And these photographs actually made their way into Giuseppe Panza's hands. Panza purchased the work that same year, the year of the mock-up, in other words, before the piece was even publicly exhibited. An examination of Nauman's 1970 drawing for Greenlight Corridor shows how the artist worked back and forth between three-dimensional models and drawings in order to develop these works. In this case, as in a number of others, Nauman clearly produced the drawing after the mock-up. Not only do the plan and perspective rendering conform exactly to what appears in the photos, but the drawing also depicts with the faint application, a little difficult to see here, maybe you can, of colored pencil, the magenta after image that one experiences upon exiting the corridor and encountering regular daylight. Something that the artist presumably could have discovered only after actually testing out the work. And this optical effect, which was anticipated by the mock-up, was intensified when the piece was actually exhibited for the first time at the La Jolla Museum of Art. Here I'm showing a later reconstruction. As I mentioned, this is a piece that's also been shown in its initial site, and this is now the Museum of Contemporary Art, San Diego. This is a view from 2008. To cite just one more example, in the summer of 1973, Nauman wrote Conrad Fischer about a piece he had just built in the studio, which he thought might work in Fischer's de Zilberf gallery. He sent a small sketch diagramming the structure, a small, triangular-shaped room painted white on the interior with yellow fluorescent lamps overhead. The room is very hard to stay inside of, Nauman added in his accompanying notes. I can't stay very long myself. He also sent this photo of the mock-up to Fischer. Yellow Room Triangular was ultimately shown at Fischer's gallery the following year. As was sometimes his practice, the artist was not on hand for the construction of the work in Germany. The sketch after the mock-up, and to a lesser extent the photo, served as guides for Fischer and the team of local art students that Fischer recruited to actually build the piece without the artist. And interestingly, in this case, as the artist himself observed in a recent interview with the Guggenheim, this is a case where the exhibited piece, which Fischer and the students assembled with this very rough plywood and scrapwood braces, had a much more irregular appearance than the artist's own mock-up, which used drywall and more regular studs. So these brief examples illustrate the importance of the studio mock-ups to the conception and development of these works. But Nauman's practice of building the works out in the studio is not merely significant with respect to the artist's process. As I indicated at the outset, I believe it has larger implications for how we might understand this whole body of work. The studio and what goes on in the studio has been a central enduring theme for Nauman, perhaps the enduring theme across his multifaceted body of work. Much of Nauman's earliest mature work in the mid-1960s grew out of a sense of impasse that the artist felt after finishing graduate school and finding himself alone in the studio. As he recounted in a 1979 interview that has often been quoted, this, quote, raised the fundamental question of what an artist does when left alone in the studio. Faced with this question, Nauman ultimately decided, if I was an artist and I was in the studio, then whatever I was doing in the studio must be art. This was the genesis for, among other works, a series of films that the artist performed, of the artist performing simple repetitive actions, such as pacing around the studio or bouncing balls, in 1967 to 68. And as has frequently been retold, Nauman's very first corridor originated from another such solitary action in the studio, as Joan was also discussing earlier. So for the 1968 video, Walk with Contrapposto, Nauman built two 20-foot-long walls, 20 inches apart, and ending at a room wall. And in the video, he can be seen slowly walking up and down this passageway, swiveling his hips. So the passage just contains his motions. And because of the camera angle, you actually can't see in the video the exterior of the corridor, only the inside. Nauman did not originally conceive of this structure as an autonomous artwork. But as Joan explained, when Marcia Tucker saw it in his studio and asked to include it in her forthcoming group show at the Whitney, he agreed. And the piece was reconstructed at the Whitney in early 1969 by the museum's carpenters according to a sketch that the artist supplied. In a revealing letter to Tucker and her co-curator, now preserved in the Whitney's archives, Nauman articulates what this transfer from the privacy of the studio to the public space of the museum meant. He explains that the piece is less a sculpture than a prop for the performance of a dance or studio exercise which I videotaped. In the museum situation, it serves to severely restrict and then reinforce the available audio, visual, and kinesthetic responses of anyone who walks in or around the walls. So this piece served as the catalyst for the whole series of corridors and room installations that followed, including the San Jose corridor. As a result, Performance Corridor has rightly been seen as a crux in Nauman's work, the bridge from his early work, in which the artist's body is at the center, to his controlled environments in which there is an apparent withdrawal of the artist, and in which it is the viewer himself or herself who is placed at the center of the work. A greater consideration of the mock-ups, however, suggests a slightly different picture. With the mock-ups, we see that this shift from studio to gallery or museum, and from artist to spectator, did not just occur in 1969 with the Performance Corridor, but was literally reenacted in each of the successive corridors and rooms of the 1970s. Behind virtually every public installation of these works lies the fleeting form of a structure, sometimes documented in photographs or in the artist's own drawings, in which the artist himself first hand-built, tested, and experienced with his body in the privacy of the studio, in a kind of private, even performative act not otherwise recorded. Like the nameless prop that became the basis for Performance Corridor, these structures are difficult to classify or pin down. Ephemeral and highly contingent, they are not quite sculptures. But of course, the same can be said of the exhibited artworks for which there are studies. What the mock-ups ultimately remind us is that even in these seemingly depersonalized public installations, which are refabricated by museum or gallery personnel, there's always the trace and memory, however veiled, of the artist's body and of the site of the artist's studio. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. We have one more speaker today, and that is Juliet Myers, studio manager for Bruce Nauman since 1985, provides organizational services to artists through her company Art Artist Care. She was Site Santa Fe's Director of Education and Public Programs from 2003 to 2012, co-founder and creative director of FACT, Fine Arts for Children and Teens, Santa Fe's premier visual arts program for young people from 1990 to 2002, served as an original member of the Education Advisory Council for the PBS series Art 21, Art in the 21st Century, and worked as a researcher and photographer for Judy Chicago. Julia.
Thank you so much, Dory. Thank you for having this kind of thinking. Bruce would be very, very happy to know that he makes you think. And he wants all of us to think. And of course, Make Me Think is a picture. Oh, you can see it up there, yes? And the only reason I can show you this is it's a photo I took in 1983, I think, in the studio in Galisteo, New Mexico. And Bruce lives in northern New Mexico, and as do I. And how did I happen to get to have a job such as this? Well, Judy Chicago introduced me to Bruce Nauman. Now, I may be one of the only people in the world who can say that. Because... And Judy figures very, very prominently in my life. I'm also a dinner party leftover. Now, by that I mean I worked on the dinner party project, and I'm still alive to tell the story. And Judy was one of the greatest teachers I've ever had because she expected more of me than I thought I could do. And I think that is the mark of a great teacher. Judy introduced me to Bruce at a holiday party at her house in Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1983. 1984, at the very end of 1984. And I spoke to Judy recently, and she sends her love to everyone, by the way, but this is about Bruce, isn't it? But Judy really would appreciate a little, yeah, please, some respect. And I recently said, Judy, I appreciate you. You've been the great teacher of my life, and I really have deep, deep feeling for this woman. And I said, Judy, you and Bruce, you're the alpha and the omega of my professional life. And she said, yeah, Bruce is the alpha. And I said, are you kidding, girl? No, Judy, you're the alpha, he is the omega. In that, of course, she was really at the beginning of the kind of jobs I've gotten to have to work with all these wonderful artists and the things I've gotten to do. And she gave me the chutzpah to find an art program for kids and find the funding to do that. I didn't know about raising money, but I watched Judy do that to produce the dinner party. So I got to have that kind of life too, to be an art educator, which is really what I think I've come to Earth to do. At any rate, this is a little, it's a deception, because it looks like it says, make me think, but there's another panel at the bottom that's hidden behind all that junk in Bruce's studio, because it says, make me think me. Make me think me. That last me, you say, well, what the heck is that about? And speaking of that, as an art educator, I want you, when you go to the corridor here at San Jose State, and is it original? Is it a refabrication? Is anything, it's always original in a certain sense of the word, isn't it, with Nauman, I think, but it's not original in the sense that, yes, it's been built before and it's been built many times, and I love what Ted said. I'm so honored to be here with Ted Mann and God, Joan Simon, legendary Joan Simon. We were best friends for a few years there. We still are, but I hope. But Joan and I, for the Walker catalog, we spoke on the phone for about 5 hours. I lost a little hearing in that time. We would speak for 5 hours a day, and at least 2 days a week. Bruce won't let me come to his studio more than 1 day a week, but when we did the retrospective, we talked 2 days a week to build that catalog raisonné for the Walker, the show that the Walker Art Center organized. It's quite amazing. And then Connie Llewellyn, I mean, wow. I know, you're looking at your phone, but I wanted to say usually, look, and the young people here with phones are being very respectful, Connie. I don't even think they're tweeting, but they might be. Please. At any rate, here we are, and it's such a joy to be here with the men and women with whom I've grown to have a relationship which is beyond professional. It's personal, and it means deeply things to me that they're secrets and I can't tell you. But I will say one thing, and let's see. Jack Fulton. Now, Jack Fulton is a legendary name if you happen to be interested in photography, and if you ever were able to attend classes at the San Francisco Art Institute. And I'm telling this story because you're recording this, right? Yeah, okay, good. Because there are some people who couldn't be here tonight, and I tried to get them to not teach their class at San Jose State University, in fact, but to come here instead, but they said they couldn't get out of it for whatever reason. I said, bring your students. But, well, you know how y'all are. Mm-hmm. Academia. And so I'm telling this story just so it's recorded, so my new friend can hear this. Bruce Nauman has a series of photographs that are iconic and legendary. It's called 11 Color Photographs. In one of them, it is Self-Portrait as a Fountain, and it's Bruce, a very young, very gorgeous Bruce Nauman, and he's spewing water out of his mouth in that photograph, Self-Portrait as a Fountain. Another really iconic one is Eating My Words, and he is seated at a table, and there's a tablecloth, red checkered tablecloth, and he has cut out of bread, sort of like my mom used to do when I come home from school, in third or fourth grade, and she would cut shapes in the bread, but he has my words are cut out of the white bread. And he's eating his words, and he has some grape jelly there to put on it, too. So eating my words. But this is the thing that I think is so important to understand is all of those feet of clay, drill team, those are drill bits in a piece of wood standing up at attention, drill team, all of those were photographed by Jack Fulton. And so that is the secret knowledge that many people don't understand, that Bruce did not have a cable release hidden in his shirt. He did not put it on a timer. No, Jack Fulton, he has the stories. He has the stories. So next time you do a fun thing here, ask Jack to come tell stories about what it was like to collaborate with Bruce Nauman back in 1967, 68. So he shot those photos of Bruce. Well, that was a diversion, but let me just say, the reason this can be here is that it was once published. I was hired, basically, in 1986, March of 1986. Oh, happy anniversary to me. It's almost the time when Bruce first called me. Judy introduced us, as I said, and she said, "Bruce, you should hire Juliet." And Bruce said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, she'll come help you." And he's like, "I don't need any help." Oh, okay, it was very nice to meet you, Mr. Nauman. And that was that. And approximately a year later, I had a phone call. "Hello? Julie?" I said, "Yes, it's Bruce." "Oh, hi, Bruce." "Well, I'm throwing all the mail into the wastebasket. Do you want to come out and open the mail now?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I've probably," and he said, "I think I've thrown away some important letters." And I said, "Yes, I'd love to come open the mail. And when do you want me to be there?" And so I was hired to open the mail. And thankfully, email has now become the thing. So now I get to open the email. And I get to communicate on Bruce's behalf. And I get to hang out with this legendary person who, by the way, is incredibly humble, a man of few words, which has been alluded to. And would I say shy? I mean, some folks here may remember that he's not verbose, and he's not a show-off, and he's not someone who wants to be a rock star, and he's embarrassed if you ask him for his autograph. So when you meet Bruce, if you should happen to, please don't ask him for his autograph, because he doesn't feel like, "Oh, look, I said I'd show pictures of cats, and that's really what I'm here for today." And this is another thing, because I got to shoot this picture, and because it was reproduced once before, I'm getting to share it with you. Otherwise, I protect the privacy of the Nauman studio. That is my job. So, okay, this is really important. Bruce, he reads voraciously, so you're getting a little touch of what does he do in the studio. So this must be art, right? If he's reading, it's art. We have Mr. Rogers, closest to Bruce, and Tilly, who's very suspect, and she still is. Mr. Rogers and Tilly are the studio cats, and they were really young. This is many, many years ago now. And Bruce had hair, too, in this one. So, okay, things change. But Mr. Rogers and Tilly are still there, and I will come back to that in a moment, as so many of my colleagues have said, and I wanted to be able to say that. I'll come back to this important in just a moment. All right. Oh, this is truly, these are tidbits that when we do the trivia contest, that does follow, right, tonight? The trivia contest, those of you who have ever seen something called Setting a Good Corner, and it is a video of Nauman's, and if you haven't seen it, just Google, right? It works for everything. Go to Vimeo and ask for Setting a Good Corner. And not only is it whatever Bruce does in the studio is art, it's whatever Bruce does anywhere. And if you set up a video camera, it becomes a work of art. And Setting a Good Corner is Senior Nauman, the ranch man, putting a post in order to hang a gate. And setting a good corner is a term that is absolutely used, by ranchers. And how do you get a gate to hang just right? And you put a railroad tie into the ground. And that orange thing has a digger kind of implement that can be added to it. And that's the very machine that dug that hole in setting a good corner. So I want you all to, that's an important thing to know. Oh, and you get a little taste of what it looks like in the fall out there in the basin and around where they live. Bruce, and he's married to Susan Rothenberg, as most of you probably know, the wonderful painter, who absolutely refused to believe that painting was dead. She's still convinced that it's important. I don't know how the rest of you all feel about it, but okay. Oh, the view. This is my view. Well, it's not mine, but if I look out the window of the office where I work for Mr. Nauman, this is a beautiful spring day, a moment where a thunderstorm was coming through. I thought you guys would enjoy that. But then I forgot that you guys have green here. We don't. This is a really strange moment where the landscape is green in New Mexico. And I want to thank Dory. I want to thank Lance Fung and Marion Fung and John Talley. These people have hosted me here for a few days. And you've been so kind to bring me out of the red clay earth and into the verdant and luscious greenness of what this is called. It's green, right? It's so amazing. And I love San Jose. And I'm thinking I could live here. But I would have to, maybe part-time, because I don't want to leave that. Oh, back to the more important part, cats. This is Mr. Rogers. Now, why is this important? And I could say this is my moment of being the art educator that I am, and I'm going to ask for your help here. What's going on in this picture? Cynthia, what? Oh, good, we have some people. I see some hands going up. What the heck? But if you're working with adults and you're trying to be an educator, you should say, what the hell is going on in this installation? Or what, but okay, what's going on in this picture? Yes. Oh. Now, I know if only I had my big laser pointer, but do you say, someone thought that was a penis, I'm sorry, but the other thing, when I showed it, you guys are really, you're very sharp. Well, it was a lesbian. She doesn't know. Oh, okay. At any rate, I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. But that is a cat's paw. Anyway. Yeah. In fact, can anyone tell me what else you might be able to discern is going on in this picture? Yeah. Oh, wait a minute. So because, and now what do you see that makes you say that? It was the cat. All right. And also the what?
But then also the pencils.
Oh, the pencils. Cool, because, man, they blend into that Speroni Westwater ad, don't they? And so you see the cat's paw and then you see the pencils. And in fact, yeah, and if you didn't get to do it yet, you can try again. I just want to say, it's really worth it. But you have to look beyond your fingertips. They can only be about that far apart, and then you have to avert your eyes and look way past, look up here at me, though you've got your fingers in your view. Oh my, that little Vienna sausage just pops right out now when I do it. But Bruce taught me, so I was taught by the master of the Parallax. But the most important thing that I'm sharing with you with this image, and just with my presence here, is that is Mr. Rogers on the ad for this exhibition of Pencil Lift and Mr. Rogers. That's the second part of the title. And that is his leg. But he's contemplating. So I took this shot. It's on my desk. Oh, and one other really important thing that you'll need to know for the trivia contest is that if you ever get to see a piece called Mapping the Studio by Bruce Nauman. It is a seven projections. And one of the projections, this is the other thing I really wanted to tell you. I was had a brainstorm. When I did the virtual reality thing, which is brilliant, I realized that Bruce did virtual reality before there was actually VR. And how he did it was he videotaped sections of his studio and then projected it on the walls at Dia Beacon or onto floating screens sometimes. And when you walk in, you are in the studio because it's actually each shot is recording exactly that position in the studio. And when we install it, we make sure that the door that goes into my office is where it would be in that space. And then the next part where there's a sink and the next part where there's a screen door. And if you can be there and stay there, please, don't leave before the miracle. You get to hear coyotes, train whistles, dogs barking, the moths fly through the image. It's a meditative piece. But the fun part for me was that he made an edition of Mapping the Studio, which is only a single projection, and it's of my desk. And I'm very proud of that. And there is a mouse running across my desk a lot at night in the studio. Now, that was another instance of, we're talking about repetition and how Bruce repeats things. Bruce is in the studio and he does something. It must be art. Bruce goes outside and digs a post hole. It must be art. And when it came to mapping the studio, Bruce walked into the studio at sunset. He turned on the camera and then he left. And it recorded for 1 hour each time he set that camera up. Right? Infrared, night vision camera. So, the punchline there is, even when Bruce is not in the studio, he's making art. So, the new show, and I'm here to officially announce, people have alluded to the retrospective, and so I want everybody to start planning their outfits for New York in October, because this big retrospective, and I mean big, this is the biggest show that the Museum of Modern Art has ever given a single artist. Whew. That opens on March 20th, and I want to see each and every one of you there. October 20th in New York. Now, we're going to, you know how they do on Broadway. You go to Boston or you go to Philly and you do the show out of town to make sure it's going to be good when you get to New York. So we are opening in Basel on March 16th at the Schaulager. And if anyone can come, let me know. I'll get you on the dinner list. But look, Basel, and Schaulager, it's very important. I don't mean to say that. Don't tell anyone that I said it was just testing it to come back to New York. But New York in October. And it will be, let me just explain, by the largest show MoMA has ever given an artist. This is why. It is the entire 6th floor of MoMA. The entire 6th floor of MoMA. But wait, there's more. The entirety of PS1. If anyone has been to PS1, it will take up just about, I think we're only leaving out one classroom at PS1, which will, be the coat room or something. But, yeah, all of PS1, the 6th floor of MoMA, October 20th. Now you may get out your phones and put it in your calendar. Thank you for being here today, and thanks for letting me talk to you. Actually, I'm the keeper of the gate, for one thing. And I'll tell you a story. It was so uncomfortable. We looked out the door, and it was a Wednesday, and I was there. By the way, it's 32 years of Wednesdays, which could be the title of something. We looked out the door, and a strange car drove up. Now, Bruce and Susan live kind of in the middle of nowhere. And the driveway is a mile long, literally, a mile long dirt road that goes down to the property. And we looked out and there was a strange car there. And he said, "Who's that? Are you expecting someone?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "Well, okay." So he walks over and he kind of watches this guy. Guy gets out of the car. He's a big portfolio under his arm and a briefcase. And he's looking around, and Bruce opens the door and says, "What do you want?" And the man said, "Oh, Mr. Nauman, I have come all the way from Finland." Bruce said, "What are you doing here?" "I have an idea for you." Oh, so wrong. That is just so wrong. You know, Bruce thinks. And yes, he wants us to think, but he doesn't want us to think up ideas for him. Okay? And he said to the man who had come all the way from Finland with an idea, a proposal, he said, "Get in your car and drive away." So, but Tony, you're an old friend, so you have to call. But no, they don't like surprises. And that's the other thing. Do you know, I mean, we're talking about this man behind his back, and I feel kind of bad about it. But the thing is we do have to talk about Bruce. Bruce does not like to talk about himself, and Bruce does not like too much attention. And that's just the fact of it, really. So it's important, though, that we're able to have these moments where we can talk about someone who is making and has made, continues to make extraordinary work and impact just decades and decades and decades of, and generations of the people who follow, you know. So, yeah.
Any other questions?
About the idea of his work and his, being shy. At the same time, his work is about himself in the studio, and you've all talked about him in the studio. And it comes up also in Gwen's presentation about his performance of himself for the magazine, and yet the work is about a kind of withdrawal, which leaves room for the participant to enter into the piece. Is that incompatible, or how do you all see that? And this is for anyone
That's quite
who would...
compatible. He's often talked about the balance between revealing and concealing, and it's something all of us do every day. He's talked about that a lot. He is a man of few words, but those words are really choice. Mm-hmm. And I think partly he's known for speaking and saying certain things many times over, or repeating them, or being very curt with an interviewer, because it depends on the questions. And if the question has cut off his answer before he speaks, and because he takes time. If you ask a question, he will think. And wait a little while. Some people get impatient and cut him off, and then he stops talking. On the other side of it, if you do know the work and you're approaching it in a way that's respectful and want to know more, and you're bringing something to the conversation, he's really talkative and engaged. And the more you know, the more he reveals. So it's a question of having a respectful distance and an engagement. And that's true of anyone who works with him or talks with him. I mean, I've called Juliet numerous times and say, on a personal level, I can pick up the phone and call him, but on a professional level, I will always call Juliet and say, "I'm thinking of doing this on this occasion. Is it a good time? And you'll say, I'll ask the question, or maybe this isn't the best time because he's working on something. So it's, I don't know any other artist, not just of his stature, who has no studio assistants, zero. He has professional colleagues that he works with. He works with Juliet, he works with Bruce Hamilton, whoever else he might need on a particular project. But that is so rare. Mm-hmm. And I'll say something else. Not only is Juliet the gatekeeper or whatever, she's the only person except Bruce's immediate family who pronounces his name correctly. I have always said it wrong. Because you talk to people, and if you say it the way you say it, or he does, they won't know who you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you should say it.
Bruce Nauman?
Yes, not
You mean,
Nauman.
no, Bruce Nauman. But, yeah, but in the world, it's Nauman now. But it's very close.
Yeah, but he
because-
says it slightly differently.
Yeah.
And out of respect, I would like to do that, but I don't. I didn't know him.
Well,
When I first knew him as
Right.
the public name before I knew him.
Right.
So.
Right. But he's rigorous, and this is the thing, this is the word I didn't say, and I think that Ted, Gwen, Joan, and Connie, certainly through the years, what we've seen is someone who is so rigorous in their practice. In everything he does, he's thoughtful, he's rigorous, he's patient. For an idea to become a work of art, it has to sit for quite a long time before it is vetted by the artist himself. And I think I know so many artists who kind of get on a roll and they know something's going to be a hit and they just make it, and they make it again and they make it again. Bruce remakes things, but for an idea to even become manifest once, it has to go through a gauntlet that is of his own making, his mind. Did you have a question?
That one little section in one of the videos where he said, I'm an artist, I just have to get in there.
Yeah.
Regardless of what the idea is, I just have to make something.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile that with what you just said?
What he didn't say there is that he thinks, most of the time he thinks, and then he makes. But so much of it is thinking, and
He may be making something else as well. Over time, he's made crafted knives. I mean,
He's
in
worked
the
with
sense, and
horses.
over the many years, he crafts words.
Yeah.
He crafts fences.
yeah, he writes. He does do other stuff. But I've just got to say, this is sort of funny because when he's saying that in that video, and he's handling this plastic green head. Okay, it's still on the studio floor. Okay, I'm just saying. Yes, it's like he was handling that. That is going to that's going to be something any minute now. But but those do. Okay, so the heads that are still on the studio floor, and there are a bunch of them. They're just lying around. It's kind of weird, but some of those heads were there for a long, long time, and then they became another piece. Do the Google, get to the Vimeo of 3-head fountain. And he took these plastic heads that had just been lying around for the longest time, and he drilled holes in them, and he hooked up some hoses, and he turned these plastic cast heads into fountains, and the water comes out.
And they were in one of them was in the Venice Biennale, where he hooked up one of the heads with the tubes with an actual
There
sink.
are three. Oh, that one. Yeah, Venice Mountains. That's going to be in the retrospective. But, yeah. Things lie around. So you're right. He says he has to get in there and do it, but it's just not the same because, unless he's sneaking around and making art on the day I'm not there, on all the days I'm not there. But I'm just saying that when I'm there, he's usually sitting in a chair reading the book with cats on his lap. So, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you guys.
But part of the making of the work is thinking about it for a long time, and we don't know, but can only assume how many no's he said to himself and rejected along the way. And something is going on because finally he will come and tell you, oh, I did this.
Right.
He won't share the process as it's going along, unless he's gotten to a stage where he's begun to work on it, like when he made the first of the new Contrapposto things, and he's wearing the same white T-shirt and blue jeans as 50 years before. But he's taken it out of the carder, and he's sliced it up. And but until when he got from the first, he must have been thinking about it for quite a while.
Oh, yeah.
And then when the first nugget that he thinks is real, then he'll fly and make the variations and go back and refinements. But you said he won't. He'll just turn up and say, oh, now.
Yeah, come look at this. He'll say, come look at this. And I had no idea what was percolating or what was going on. Maybe he's shown it to his wife, but most people are not privy to that long wait.
But also,
It's a long wait. Sometimes it's painful.
the interesting, I should say, when we made that four artist film, Bruce and Susan they kind of casually knew each other, but it was 3 years later when they met under different circumstances and married in '89.
Mm-hmm.
And the two of them are the most private people, so they're often, as you can say, their own studios. From time to time, they will show each other other things, but.
Very private.
For one more question.
Sure, and I guess I have to ask this as an architectural historian about an artist who is building walls and making corridors and drawing them and having other people make them. To what extent do you think we could think of Bruce Nauman as a kind of critic of architecture? And especially in a time around 1970 when architects were talking about how restrictive architecture is, how it constrains the body and these kinds of things. And here he was designing corridors. I don't know, so that's just a question.
I was going to say something else like that, and I cut it out earlier because I didn't want to go on too long. But even when he's using architectural frames or spaces, it becomes sort of extension of his personal space. And what I learned this time from watching the wild Brazilian dance is that if you think about him thinking about the Contrapposto stance, and it's dynamic, it's posed, it's a gesture arrested. It's not like archaic sculpture, which is frontal and fixed and symmetrical. But what I realized this time, and it's going to sound kind of crazy, is he turns that mapping of a square on the floor into a three-dimensional space, and he himself is not just the sculptural material, but the sculpture come alive again, reanimated. He is the not fixed in one moment contrapposto. And it occurred to me that he makes that volume so that the corridors really are part of his, I think they are sculpture, even though they're architecturally inflected. I think when we see him move like that, you realize he really is a sculptor. And I was all going to say this one other thing. At that same moment, he not only used himself as the sculptural form and reanimated it, but he was thinking about a lot of other sculptors like Henry Moore. And he and Jack Fulton, he made this 6 foot, well, I shouldn't say 6 foot because I'm not looking it up and checking it, but a human-sized giant black and white photo where he creates a three-dimensional virtual homage, action, presence of Henry Moore. It's called Light Trap for Henry Moore, and he spun a flashlight, and Jack Fulton took the picture. So I think he was thinking of sculpture then. I think he's always, even when he draws, he cuts apart the drawings, tapes them together with Scotch tape. So I guess I really am now more and more, the closer I look at these things, especially that when I saw that in the video this time, I think of him as sculptor, but I think architecture is the largest sculpture we know.
Just to add something, I mean, I think I don't really have an answer to that question, but it does also make me think about someone like Gordon Matta Clark, or which I don't necessarily immediately place Nauman in relationship to Matta Clark, but that question actually makes me think about how, kind of prominent architecture was to those
but it's the same
artists, and that was certainly a critique of architecture. So, yeah.
But it's the same thing with Gordon Matta Clark. It was his relationship of his body to those architectural elements, whether he was, swinging the saw and moving, cutting the spaces, being
suspended
so
you could also
in the
think
pier.
about Matta Clark in terms of the body art, which so it sheds this new light on both of them.
And I think both of those things, what you said is also what Nauman did in the studio, as you said, were these exercises. He wasn't a dancer, and he was moving in a way that was new. It wasn't performance art, it wasn't body art, and it's exactly what Gordon was doing. Gordon was younger, but he also was moving through space. It was totally, again, it wasn't body art, It wasn't, you could call it drawing, but he was wielding the saw, and he was in the space. It couldn't have been done without the architecture. And he was trained as an architect. So that's actually in that whole period that you're talking about in terms of the magazine, really is a different experience in the world, whether it's in the maquettes that you're talking about. Things are not fixed, but a person is experiencing something. And who's the artist experiencing it in the first place, and what are they offering to the audience to bring their own bodies into engagement with? But that moment that you talked about and you talked about are exactly the same.
I'm afraid we are out of time. Thank you all so much for your...
Thank you.